Welcome to Master the Game. I'm Juce, and today we are going to be talking about whether it is the Dungeon Master's job to cater a campaign and all of its encounters around the party's composition. So let's get started. First of all, I want to say thank you to our patrons. You guys have been really supportive, and I would not be where I am today without you. You guys have been great. You've been there every step of the way, whether I have questions, whether you have questions, I love to answer those, and basically we just have a good time talking. So again, I want to thank you to all my patrons. If you are not a patron and you've been thinking about signing up, just know you get access to random roll tables. You get access to possibly playing games with me. We do a monthly one-shot here. And there's going to be more things opening up very soon. If we get to 15 patrons a month, we are going to start doing a PDF a month for you guys. That could be an adventure. It could be a faction. It could be a monster, magical items. It could be all sorts of different things. You as a patron get to offer your suggestions for those as well. And anyone out there thinking about it, jump on in. You won't regret it. So the other day, NoNat posted on Twitter that he thinks that a DM should be tailoring their encounters around party composition. And I didn't necessarily agree with that. And I have a few reasons why, and I'll get into that here in a minute. But, it was interesting seeing all the people's posts about it and ideas and things like that. So when it comes to the Dungeon Master or the Game Master's job at the table, there's a lot of things they're responsible for. When you are preparing a campaign, you want to at least make some story things tie back to the player characters, whether it's their backstories or NPCs they know or things like that. You also do want to take into account what the party composition is to an extent, but you don't want to tailor everything around that. In other words, you don't want to use kids' gloves to help your players get past encounters. Examples: if you have a group and you lack a rogue, that doesn't mean don't put locked chests or locked doors in your dungeons, in your, setting at all. In fact, I would say it makes it more interesting now if there are things like that. Are they going to use a spell to open it? Are they going to break the door down to get to the next room? There's a lot of ways to still handle these things. And I don't think you should tailor all of this stuff around the fact, well, there's not a rogue, or, oh, we don't have a magic user, so we shouldn't have arcane traps. Leave all that stuff in there. When it comes down to it, I said in my video before about D&D being too easy for players. You can find the link right up here. In that video, I stated mixing things up. I don't care what the party composition is. To me, as a player, it's most interesting when you have certain things that are not always the obvious solution. How many games have you guys played where you come up on a locked door and the rogue checks for traps and then they pick the lock? Like that happens all the time. But what happens if you don't have a rogue? Is it always going to be the one with the highest dex doing it? Or all of a sudden, does your barbarian actually lend something to this as they can break it down? Or maybe your wizard with the knock spell. There's a lot of ways to solve these things. If you don't have magical healing, how does your party respond to crucial, dire situations? Do they retreat and try to heal? Do they retreat and decide to come back a week later? Like, what is the thought process that goes into it? This is far more interesting than just saying, well, there's not a lot of healing, so I'm not going to throw monsters that do a lot of damage at them. Like, come on. Like, that's just, you're holding back as a dungeon master. You're using kid gloves with your party. Most of these groups we're talking about are all adults. People can think outside the box. Let them solve the problems. Put the stuff out there. It isn't your job as a DM to know how they're going to react. It isn't your job as a DM to say, oh, well, these are the only ways through this thing. That's not your job. Your job is to place things in the world, and the players are to solve those. Now, again, I think sometimes you do want to cater encounters based on party composition, but not all the time. This is the reoccurring, advice I've given on other videos. Don't always cater towards what your group is good at or bad at. Occasionally, yes, to mix things up. But ultimately, your encounter should make sense for the setting and what's going on. And that doesn't, like, if you don't have a single fighter in your group and they're all squishy type characters, tough. They'll figure it out somehow, whether that's how they use their spells, whether that's how they use tactics. Maybe they purposely put barriers in the way to help them overcome things, Let the players figure it out. Is it going to be harder for them? The answer is yes. If they don't have the expected basics covered, such as a healer, a rogue for stealth and, unlocking things quietly, your tank, and a wizard for any arcane things, they can still figure things out. They can still come up with really creative solutions. And I want to challenge you as a dungeon master, game master, keeper, whatever your game calls it. I want to challenge you to let them figure it out. Okay? We saw this a little bit in our Beckme game, and I'm okay with it. But we're playing an old school Beckme Rule Cyclopedia game, and Roll Stats gave us a NPC cleric. And I know he did it because it's a tough adventure and lethality is really high. If I was running the game, I wouldn't. Unless the players sought one out in the city. Then it would probably be there. But if they're not seeking it out, I probably wouldn't have given it to them. And that's just me. I don't hold back. It's unfortunate, but I don't. We played Rifts a couple weeks ago. I killed my wife's character first encounter. That's how the dice fell, and she put herself in a situation that got her killed. And again, I try not to hold back on things. And I don't think Dungeon Master should most of the time. Occasionally, if something warrants it, maybe you hold back a little. But for the most part, to me, when you do stuff like this, you might as well fudge dice rolls. And it's something I used to do. I used to fudge dice rolls. We're talking 6, 7, 8 years ago. I don't fudge dice rolls anymore, and I'm so glad I don't. My games are far more interesting. There's a lot of unexpected things that come up when you just let the players figure things out. They can always run from an encounter. If you don't have a healer, there's always a chance to run. If you're a DM that traps them and corners them, that's a whole different thing. And maybe certain monsters are smart enough to do that, or certain NPCs are smart enough to do that. If you take away the option of running, whatever, that's on you, I guess. Like, you can tell as a player when a DM is holding back. Like, all the encounters favor a certain type of character, or you're fighting just a bunch of cupcake monsters that are no threat. You can feel that. And you're removing some of the tension from the game by removing these elements. You can have locked doors. There might be another way past there. There might be a different access point to it, but it's more difficult, and make sure they know that in game that it's more difficult. Be like, yeah, you notice there's another way around, and you start going through, but there's tons of, like if it's in a dungeon or a cave, maybe there's one locked door, right? That would get them right to where they needed to go. But because they don't have that character that can get through the large iron door, they have to go around, and maybe there's now a natural predator this is their habitat. That's why going through the door would have been great, but now they got to go around to get in the back. That might be difficult. It might pose an interesting encounter. Do it. It's kind of like when you have a group that's got no area of effect, which means the weak monsters, a bunch of them, are really effective. Whereas if you have a lot of area of effect, then your weak monsters are not effective when you have a lot of them, but your buff, single or 2 monsters that are really strong, are a lot better. Or when you have nobody in the group can do ranged attacks, so you throw a flying kobold who can hit him from range, right? And he can just do it all day because nothing's hitting him back. Knowing these things about your party is important. It's good, and you can challenge them in certain ways. But also, again, do not tweak all your encounters that you had prepared just because you're missing a healer and you're like, well, now no matter what, I can't do all this. I'm going to take away, half the lethality from every encounter now. Or, oh, we don't have a tank, so I'm going to make every encounter, all these monsters hit a little bit weaker instead of, their normal damage or whatever. Again, it's too obvious to the players. It removes all sense of threat. And to me, it's just not the way to go. That's just my quick little, opinion on this. I would love to hear your thoughts below. I'm sure a lot of you disagree with me, and I want to hear why below. Remember, the Dungeon Master's the player too. The players are players. Everybody should be having a good time. And if, the Dungeon Master's having to tweak things constantly just because of the composition, which can change just like that. If one player dies, the whole party composition can change drastically. So again, I wouldn't cater to the party composition. I would expect your players to be smart enough to solve situations or find other ways around. And if they can't complete it, as long as it's not like a main quest thing they had to do, then it's okay. If it's a side quest and the thing behind the door is really insignificant, maybe it's an extra magic item, leave it as it is. If they can't get in, they can't get in. Those are my thoughts. Would love to know what you think in the comments below. Like I said, give me a like, or if you blatantly disagree and you think I'm giving terrible advice, give me a dislike. That's fine too. But give me a comment. The comment is the most important thing because I'd love to have a conversation back and forth. This is Master the Game. I am Juice. Game on.